This conversation originally premiered at CFF on Tuesday, March 19th, 2024 to a live theater audience. Adapting a short film concept into a career-propelling feature film is no easy feat. Our guests today explore various ways to transform their calling card into a stepping stone towards a successful career in feature filmmaking and beyond. Cheers, filmmakers Ian Harnarine, Julia Lederer, Rebeca Love, and moderator Eric Bizzarri. Welcome to the fest.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming out. Really appreciate it. So we're going to bring out our guests, Ian Harnarine, Julia Lederer, and Rebeca Love. Hi everybody. Welcome. We're here. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. So we're going to start off. So Ian's film Doubles opened the 2024 Canadian Film Fest last night. Sold out show, which is incredible. And Julia Lederer's film With Love in a Major Organ, which is also playing at the Canadian Film Fest this week. And we also have a Rebeca Love, who's here on the panel today, almost done post-production on Fortescue. So just to start off, I guess, do you each want to talk about your first features? Give us the premise. Tell us about the scope of the projects. Ian, you want to start?
Sure. So it's a father-son story. It's about a son that travels to Toronto to try to meet up with his father, and they have an estranged relationship. It's actually based off of my short film from many years ago, and I guess we'll talk more about this. But just the adaptation of going from that short to the feature was it was a big step in many ways, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah, With Love in a Major Organ, it's about a woman who wants to fall in love, wants to be able to love, and is sort of an emotional renegade in a world that's sort of turned up from our own, where emotional suppression is seen as self-care. And she rips her own heart out and sends it to the person who she has fallen in love with. But it's not body horror. Her heart is a lantern. Yeah, so that's the film. It's adapted. I come from theater. I'm also a playwright, and it's adapted from my own play that premiered in 2012, and we shot the feature in 2022. So the characters and story have been in my life for a very long time. Yeah.
So I shot my first feature, Fortescue, in September. The way I think about it, it's sort of like a love triangle at a cottage kind of vibe, but it's more a story about female friendship. Two best friends, they're at a cottage, they're tanning, they're having so much fun. They look pretty schlumpy. They're not too concerned about their appearance. They're being whimsical and weird. And then a boyfriend arrives and disrupts the dynamic. It's a story about psychosis. I live with bipolar disorder. Most of my filmmaking is about psychosis. Where does psychosis come from? How do we respond to psychosis? There's sort of a meta-theatrical element to it. Touches on fairy tales. It touches on slut shaming. It touches on patriarchy. It touches on sort of the way that hetero women sort of perform a different version of themselves when there are men around, compared to sort of the magical world that they create amongst themselves when there's no guy around. Yeah.
It's fantastic. And so just jumping in here, I guess I wanted to ask the three of you the writing process between shorts to features, right? Because each of you have had obviously experience in directing shorts. And so what do you feel the biggest obstacle is from going from shorts to features? Obviously it's much more, obviously they're much longer, but like the writing process is specifically like, do you start with beat sheets? Do you write outlines? Do you go straight into the dialogue? Like have the processes changed between shorts and features, or do they like relatively stay the same?
Sure. So actually my original story that I originally wrote was, it was about 50 pages long, which is of course unfeasible. There's no use for a 50-page script in films. And so I originally sort of shrunk that down. I really condensed that into, it was about 18-page script that we made of the short, and it ended up being about a 15-minute film. And then when I went back to make the feature, it was a matter of just going back to that original 50-page script, which is useless, and really expanding upon the themes and the ideas and the characters, because it's a much larger canvas that you're given when you're writing a feature. And so I could really get into some of the details and themes and conversations that I really hope the film would strike. But in terms of like, I guess what you're asking about in terms of process, I adhere to the 8-sequence structure of screenwriting, which I really believe in, and I think it's a great way of writing a feature, just starting with an idea and then trying to carry forth it. It's just sort of, standard 3-act structure, but broken down even more into sort of, writable sections. I think it's a lot easier to digest when it's 8 sequences as opposed to a first act, a second act, and a third act. That's getting really in the weeds of screenwriting stuff, but...
Yeah, I mean, I can say that first of all, I just want to say I'm a screenwriter and a playwright. I'm not a director. So Kim Albright directed With Love and a Major Organ. So I'll come at this just from that perspective. I hate outlines. I hate beat sheets. That doesn't mean I don't think they're useful, but I always write from an emotional place first, and that doesn't always fit into structure. And I think for me, a lot of finding what I want to say and do comes from the writing process. Also, writing outlines to me is really boring and I'm kind of lazy. So it's that too. And it's also hard to write. And so if I'm going to convince myself to write, I want it to be fun. And so sometimes the only way I'll start a new project, because starting a new project is scary, is if I get to write it first. That doesn't mean I don't, often halfway through, have to take a step back. I use a lot of cue cards. I do use outlines and beat sheets sometimes, but I don't tend to write a really detailed outline first, just because, I think it's just a different process. I write a lot of drafts, and I do have to take a step back and restructure with cue cards, usually at some point, at least once. But
I guess just jumping off of that, because this film was originally a Fringe play, right? That you had written almost over 10 years ago. How is it sort of adapting a play into a feature? What was that process for you?
It was a huge learning curve in a really positive way, but also challenging, but challenges are good. And I think I made 3 shorts. In the time that I started the feature and we shot it, I made 3 shorts. So making those films also really helped me learn to think more visually as we went through the process of getting this script ready. The play has 3 characters in it. It's both, I think in theater, it's both bigger and smaller, because with the film, I get to think about the central character, Annabelle. I get to think, who are her parents? Where does she work? What is the world around her like? And what world can I create that works in contrast to who she is? It's something for her to fight against in a way that I didn't get to define so much in the play. There are other things, in the play, the 2 characters meet on a subway. And the first thing the producer that we worked with, Madeline Davis, who's wonderful, the first thing she said to me was we cannot have a subway in this film. We cannot afford a subway. And so there are those things, because as it's wonderful to get to define things and get to create them. And also you have to be able to. So I think that's sort of the difference between the 2. And also I'm very language based. I love language. I love playing with language. And I also work a lot through metaphor. And so that's a transition between mediums too. And the film, story-wise, is very different than the play. The core is the same. For me, the core is the question, what do I do with my heart? It's hard to have feelings in the world. How do you contend with those things and live as a human? But the core question is the same, but the stories are quite different. And I'm proud of that. I think it's hard to find a play that you then see as a film and think, I'm so glad it's a film too. So we tried to make this into something different, suited to film. Yeah.
So touching on my experience making shorts versus my experience making features. Before working on my feature, I wrote, directed, and produced 8 shorts. One thing I'm always thinking about is money. I'm always thinking about money as a writer, because I like to design my writing around budgets that I know I'll have access to. So I'd say for a short film, my previous 2 short films, Parlor Palm and Eve Parade, they both touch on psychosis. They're both kind of one location shoots. I would have about $40,000 to work with each of these films, and they were generally 2-day shoots. So that's a lot of money that you're working with for just 2 days of shooting. And one thing I found working with shorts is that I had a lot more wiggle room to improvise with actors, meaning that you have more money to pay your actors for rehearsals, and engaging in that process allows actors to make larger contributions, to live in their characters, to live in their scenes and explore and play and make important contributions to dialogue or even to blocking, versus my feature was $170,000, meaning for a 15-day shoot. And that means you just, and I was working with ACTRA for my feature, and they're it's a big jump working from like working in a non-union world to working in an actor world. Like obviously I want to respect my actors and no matter what the situation is, but there are a lot more rules when you're engaging sort of more with union actors. So like I just found that like working on my feature, I didn't have as much of an opportunity to engage with the text and the actors through rehearsal to allow them to explore more and make their own contributions. I'm delighted with the script that I wrote. I think I wrote a great script, but just in terms of like that jump, yeah, I'm always thinking about like the budgets that you have access to and like what can you do with different amounts of money. And like, yeah, like when you're doing a 15 day shoot, that's a ton of scenes that you're working through. And it's harder to spend as much time working through each scene. So that was, I think, probably the biggest difference I noticed in terms of like my writing. And like for me, improvising and working with actors is like kind of a part of the writing process. When I write scripts, I often write autobiographical stories. They're born directly out of my experiences with insanity, with psychosis, with violence against those who live with mental illness. And so I don't believe in structure or reading books about how to write a screenplay or rules. Like I don't really believe in rules. I will just sit down and like tap into my most manic self, and I will, like my last screenplay, which is my sophomore, which I'm pitching around, like I wrote that in 14 hours. I just like sat and like wrote for 7 hours, went to bed, woke up the next day, wrote for another 7 hours, and then I had a draft. Not to say that it's the best thing in the world, but that's just kind of my process, is like I just kind of let it all out and I don't worry about form or rules.
And will you work with like story editors in that process?
Yeah, like down the line, I might bring people in and get people to read things and give their suggestions. And I love that process. Sometimes I'll bring actors in to like give their thoughts. But in terms of like the generation of the original story, it just kind of comes out.
Oh, I was just going to say, I would also say in terms of going specifically from shorts to features, I find that with a short, usually I'm thinking about one thing I want to express or one question that I want to pose that I don't necessarily need to resolve. Whereas with the feature, I think characters come for me, and their journeys and their bigger journeys come into play when I'm trying to think of what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was the next point I was going to make too. Is almost like like one of the questions I was going to ask is like writing characters between shorts and features must be so much more expansive. You know, like you have characters with goals that might be short term, maybe in shorts, but like in features, maybe long term. So how are you navigating those sort of like interpersonal relationships between characters within the scripts? Do you find that like it's easier to, like, I guess you mentioned like have a specific focus or have a specific thesis you're working to, or do you try to like pepper in other interpersonal relationships that sort of like drive you to the thesis, if that makes sense?
I think it depends on like the spine of the story a little bit. Like I have a short called It's Nothing, and it is about a woman digging a hole, which is a metaphor for mental illness and an eating disorder. And the idea is that I'm trying to show you the experience of a subjective emotional state of it. I'm going from the inside out, and she digs down because it's safer, and also she's further away from the world. And so that metaphor, that emotion, like that's, and the other relationships in the film, that's like 15 minutes. Like I don't need more than 15 minutes to express that. Yeah. Whereas with Love in a Major Organ, it's a whole world that we're creating. And part of the joy of that transition from theater to film was getting to find those friendships and build that character in a way where what she's doing is so significant that you want to be with her for 90 minutes and you want to know about her relationships. And we go much deeper that way.
Ian, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think, at least in my experience with shorts, it's going from shorts to features, you actually have a lot more opportunity to do visual storytelling and to fill in a lot more gaps. So like for example, in my short, the guy that plays the father, in the short, he says he's a dishwasher in Toronto. But in the feature, we actually see that. He doesn't need to say it. Like we can actually go and see him doing what it is he does, and we get to see how he feels about it and what he really wants out of his life. And that's just like one line in the short that you just can't really explore. There's no time for it. But in the feature, you do have that expanded palette that you can show things rather than have people say it.
Yeah, I would say in my shorts, I'm trying to pack a lot of ideas in. They're all a little bit manic and scattered in Parlor Palm, I'm touching on the difficulties of caregiving and the origins of insanity. And I'm touching on climate change, and I'm touching on motherhood anxiety and fear of the apocalypse. And I'm touching on all these things in like 20 minutes. so I think you can pack a lot into shorts if you're able to sort of tie them all into a compelling thesis. In my short Eve Parade, I'm also touching on violence against those living with mental illness in our psychiatric institutions, but I'm also touching on sort of one approach to caregiving. So there's lots happening, but I'd say in a feature, there are just more plot points. There are more things happening, and managing the mechanics of storytelling so that all of these plot points can create a compelling thesis. I like creating stories that are quite conventional. So trying to sort of tie in 2 or 3 different storylines, like your central storyline with sort of like more minor storylines, that is a little bit more tricky. And because I have like a non-conventional writing process, it's a little bit tricky to like manage all of these different things happening to all these different people and making sure that they all sort of can contribute to one compelling thesis. It's tricky, but it's fun.
I was going to say too, so like each of your films are quite obviously like different in style and tone and stuff. Like what have been some films and filmmakers that have helped you to sort of define your style? And I guess for you, Julia, other writers.
Yeah, so actually finding references with Kim, who directed the film, was a process for us. And it was really such a great tool for us to figure out what the tone is, because that's another challenge of going to shorts and features as a screenwriter, is that with a feature you have to trust your director so much because there's so many moving parts, as opposed to with a short there are fewer. But yeah, Charlie Kaufman is a huge one. Being John Malkovich was sort of our central reference for this film. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is another one, like sort of films that live in that world. What else? We started with Amélie, but it didn't really. We sort of moved away from that as we got into the film. The Lobster was another one, but I actually can't watch the whole Lobster. It's too dark and violent for me. So I only can say that the first half of The Lobster is a reference for me, and the full film for the director.
It's been on my list for a while. I haven't seen it yet.
It's just really dark. Yeah, and I'll say also I've gotten to see lots of different Canadian films this year, just being at festivals with this film, and those have been really inspiring for future projects, like Suze by Lindsay Stewart and Dane Cook.
That was a good one.
The Queen of My Dreams, which is Fazia Mirza. Like, just there's so many wonderful films. I'm so excited to see these films too that act as constant inspiration.
Yeah. Ian, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess, some of my favorite filmmakers are like Terrence Malick and like Spike Lee and people like that. But I find myself more, those are obviously landmark works there, but I'm more inspired actually by, I don't know, like the people around me and like real things, stories that I hear from family members or that I read about in the news. I'm kind of like a news hound. Like I just read a lot of news, and I watch a lot of local news too, which I don't think anybody watches, but I really get into it because for the most part, you're seeing people on the worst day of their lives, right? And how are they going to deal with this? And I draw inspiration from that, like from those stories. Don't get me wrong, I watch a ton of films and everything else like that, but I can't say that there's this particular filmmaker that inspired the work that I make. Although there's a lot of work that I admire out there in the world, but I find more inspiration from the people and places around me and that I read about constantly.
Yeah, just going off of that, I love the idea of taking inspiration from like non-conventional or other arenas. So for me, I care deeply about painting, about oils and acrylics, and I run an arts blog called the Toronto Arts Report, where I pay close attention to painters and musicians and novelists, and I like keeping tabs on like what other people are doing. But in terms of Fortescue, I've really struggled to find the right sort of reference filmmakers to describe what's going on in our story and what other filmmakers are informing my style. What I've landed on is like Noah Baumbach meets Chekhov. Mm-hmm. So like, I don't know if that lands, but that's where I'm at right now. I also love Charlie Kaufman. Our film is not as like quirky as like a lot of Charlie Kaufman's, like, and I totally see like the vibe vibe. I love it. It's so fun in your trailer. But from Charlie Kaufman, I'm really interested in the notion of performance. He loves thinking about performance. Synecdoche, New York is one of my favorites of all time because it's all about like performing in performance, you know. So a lot of my films, what I'm interested in is like, if you've ever seen a person lost in their psychosis downtown who's talking to themselves and they might seem really aggressive or they're sort of acting a little bit strange. I've been in that state of mind myself 10 years ago when I was lost in my own psychosis. And what I find interesting is like the comparison between a person lost in psychosis and a theater actor, because they're both kind of lost in a world that is not real. And they're both quite performative. Like if you see someone on the street, on the subway who's not well, they're often very animated, like performing something. And so for me, like a lot of my stories touch on this like element of like when someone is sick with psychosis, they're kind of lost in their own little world. They think they're the Virgin Mary. It becomes like theater. So in that sense, like I'm always looking at, I can't find that, maybe somebody in the audience has a word for this, but it's a genre of film that touches on like performance within film, like theater within film. So like Dead Poets Society has a play within the film. A lot of Wes Anderson films have plays within the film. Austin Land has a play within the film. I don't like, there's got to be a better word for this. It's not quite meta theater, but it's like films that like touch on theatrical performance, because I got my start in theater similar to you.
Yeah, and I guess just building off of that too, and I could ask, I guess from a directorial standpoint too, like in writing from often personal experiences, like how are you able to mold actors' performances too? How is that process for you?
I mean, teaching, it's not really teaching, but like inviting an actor to engage in a psychotic performance is dangerous, first of all, because as we've seen in a few like Hollywood celebrities who have taken on mental illness in their professional life and then have suffered very severe consequences, like you have to protect your actor because it's a terrifying headspace to enter into, and it can be hard to like escape, like to leave at the end of the day. But I just go through my own, I talk to them a lot about what I have gone through, and some of them have witnessed friends who have gone through psychosis. Everyone has witnessed a person living downtown who's not well. So drawing from, observation and then just trying to tap into their own very emotional experiences and trying to remember what it's like when you're really not well, you're really angry, you're really, not that psychosis is the exact same as anger, but it's a very deeply personal experience working with actors in this specific type of role, and it requires a lot of planning and a lot of conversation because you don't want to injure anyone.
And then I guess for you, Julia, like in working with Kim, did you have sort of input in how the characters were being formed too, even through performance?
Yeah, well, Kim and I actually met through Anna Maguire, who's the lead in the film. I know her because she directed a short of mine, It's Nothing, the one I was speaking about earlier. And she's also a wonderful actor and had met Kim, and Kim wanted to meet screenwriters. She was moving from the UK back to Canada, and Anna introduced us, and I sent her my play more just as a representation of the sort of work I'm interested in. And her memory is we both decided. My memory is it was her idea to make it into a film, but both are good. And so knowing that Anna was the central force in it was really helpful to me as a writer as it formed. And also just knowing that she's such a smart actor and what she's like, how sharp she is, how funny she is, was central to creating that part for sure. And then with the casting beyond that, we were in conversation about it, and I wasn't there. The film was shot in Vancouver, and I was working in Chicago at the same time, so we did some Zooming, and I met the actors, most of the actors through Zoom, and we had a chance to talk about character, and then it was really in Kim's hands. But we spent such a long time, or it felt like such a long time, developing this film, that by the time it came to shooting, we had so many conversations about everything that it was easy to know that we were on the same page.
That's fantastic. Ian?
In terms of casting, I think it's really, really hard. I mean, it's like the most important thing you can do for your film is getting the right cast. And we did some auditions for my film and we found some wonderful actors, but I've sort of taken a more, I guess, targeted route. And I watch a lot of things, I go to a lot of shows. And if there's an interesting actor that I think could be good for a role, or even not, I'll just request to meet them and talk to them. Everyone's kind of really available now on Instagram or whatever. It's like you can just send a DM to somebody, tell them that you're working on a film and you're interested in talking to them about it. And I found that to be a far more effective route rather than sort of traditional audition process, because I'm more interested in connecting with somebody and seeing how they work, as opposed to like, I don't know, I feel we as filmmakers, we deal with constant rejection all the time, but like actors really are dealing with constant rejection all the time. And it's just such like like the audition is just like such a weird thing where there's so many power plays that are happening there that I don't think I ever really get an opportunity to connect with an actor. And so that's why I try to meet with people one-on-one and see if they really do understand the material or the things that I'm interested in. And that goes like, I feel like that goes a long way in terms of actually when you're on set working with people. Because I don't do a lot of rehearsals, because usually there just isn't a lot of time or money to be able to do that. And so I feel like, but we do a lot of conversation. I speak with my actors a lot, as opposed to sort of more traditional rehearsals. And if you are able to make your actors feel comfortable just working with you, I think that goes a long way when you're shooting on film, because, you know, film production says, as you all know, it's like the most unnatural thing you're asking people to do. There's like all these people around you, there's lights set up, and you're just trying to create these moments of truth, and hopefully the camera's rolling at the same time that you can capture that. And that's a really, really hard thing to do unless you have, you know, a great relationship already with your actors as real people. So that's what's important to me in terms of that whole process.
That's awesome. And I guess from there, because we've spoken a lot about creative as directors, when do you feel like you're ready to go into production? Like when have you hit that spot where you're like, okay, that's it, the script's ready, we have the stuff in place? Like, is it like a looming deadline? Like, do deadlines help you to get into production, or is it you that sort of decides, okay, we're sort of ready to tackle it now?
Yeah, in my case, for my feature, we knew we wanted to shoot in September because we were shooting up in cottage country. We wanted it still to be summer, but we didn't want a lot of cottagers on the lake. So we just knew we have to be up there, you know, early September. So it's like a firm deadline. It's like, this is when we know we're putting all our money in our accommodations, booking everything. This is when we're booking all of our team and all of the rehearsals and script work, and like are just leading up to that deadline. And I think it helps to have a very firm sense of like, we absolutely need to shoot now, so we need to get ready.
I need deadlines. Like, as a filmmaker, like deadlines help me when I know that the deadline is sort of just any which way, and I can make my own schedule. I mean, there's like a freedom in that, but there's also like it's helpful to have like, this is where. But
I will say, I dream of the day where like we can just work on something until we feel we're ready, and then we go. Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love that. You know, like 6 months of pre-production and rehearsal, and but yeah, that's just I think the reality of production is like, you need to plan in advance. You need to have your dates ready. Yeah.
In terms of the script, I feel like it can be forever. I think one of the challenging things about writing, especially independent film, is that all of the starting work comes from you. I've been working on a second feature with a director who's also been involved as a story editor, which has been great, but still, like, obviously I'm the writer, so the writing falls to me, and it falls to me before you know if it will ever be produced. So that can be challenging, because there are going to be so many steps and so many opinions that you have to learn to navigate along the way. Sometimes I think about when a script is ready to send out.
That was my next thing for you.
And I think it has to be something that other people have read for me, and also that I've had time away from a little bit, even if that's just a couple of weeks to come back to. And I think I need to really be able to stand behind it, which is harder for me in film than theater, because in theater I can see the play and figure it out that way and know I can stand behind it. I have other people with me. But with film, you really have to decide what that is for yourself. And there's so much doubt involved all the time, but also you can pick apart a script forever, and not always for the better. So
like, there's always stuff to change. There's always stuff.
There's always a question. There's always something. And so I think it's like, what are you saying the thing that you want to say, or asking the thing you want to ask? And do you know why each scene is there is a big one for me.
In terms of, I guess, setting it, you have to set a date, even though it's like a year away perhaps, but there's just so many considerations when you're setting a date, whether it's actor availability. My film is like around Christmas time, and obviously we have no money to recreate Christmas in exteriors. So we got to shoot around winter time. And then like I have a day job. There's only a certain time that I can shoot. I teach. So, all right, during a winter break is when we got to shoot this film. And then, okay, we can't, it's not likely to shoot like right around Christmas, like in the end of December. But we also still need Christmas decorations up. So, okay, we're going to start shooting January 4th. And we just set a date hoping that there's going to be free production design all over the city. It's still going to be cold. And then I can still like do my day job as well. But then once you set a date, it's like it almost becomes a machine where you've got like your actors are getting ready. You've told them what the dates are for sure. People are you start booking crew based on those dates. I think it's really crucial just to set a date, because like the script is never feel that it's ready. It's never, there's always mistakes that you're going to find. I mean, my film's finished, it's screening, and I still see the mistakes when I'm like, why did I write that? It makes no sense. Or like you just cut wholesale scenes out from a production that you spent, you know, like a day shooting, and then you just cut it eventually. And it's just like, we could have made that decision on the script and saved a lot of money and a lot of resources and time.
Yeah, I find that a lot of, let's say, emerging filmmakers that I'm speaking to, it's like there's a constant just, oh, but I can't, I'm not ready because it doesn't feel ready. But ultimately, I guess it's like a gut feeling too. I guess I was going to move into quickly, like how, because I think this is really important for people to know, like how are you adopting work-life balances? How are you able to address burnout? I feel like there are a lot of, you know, especially in having now completed your first features, like in moving into sort of the next stage, how are you addressing work-life balances? What are some ways in which you're sort of like, you know, adopting your practices and stuff? Because I feel like, again, like this is coming from a lot of filmmakers I speak to, a lot of people are sort of struggling with this, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Very honestly, that's an issue for me, especially right now. This film premiered in March 2023, and we've been very fortunate with screenings. So it's been especially recently, a fair bit of travel and a lot of talking about something that feels very personal and vulnerable, which I love doing. Like so much of it is about connecting with other people. So to get to do that is I value it so much. But it takes a lot out of you, and it doesn't pay any money. It costs money. And there are other projects and other jobs that I need to be doing at the same time. And so I'm finding, like, especially in this moment, after a year and coming up to our theatrical, that I'm totally burnt out. And I
appreciate you being here.
Oh no, I'm happy to, but this is about connection.
But generally,
which is
different.
Of
course. And there's a collaborative moment here. Like it's like, you know, collective experiences in cinema and watching things together are important. But I feel like questions like this are also important because it's important for all of us to know that it's universal. Like the feeling of that is universal, which is, interesting.
Yeah. And I find, but having conversations and going to the screenings and things like this, it is about connecting. It's about talking about the work. It's about the thing that I'm most passionate about. And so I think I always have energy for that. But outside of that, it's hard. And the work-life balance is something that I'm still very much figuring out.
Yeah, this is a really important question for me. I live with 3 chronic health conditions and I identify as a disabled person. This question is like especially important for me around production because production is exhausting, and in my mind it requires a kind of physical strength that I don't always have to just get through like 3 weeks straight of shooting. So for me, like I was really proud of our team. We never had one day over 8 hours, which was like really and I try to talk to any producer I know about how, not just for my sake but for my team's sake, how we did such a better job because we had enough sleep and we were feeling rested. You know, again, it gets back to writing and how do you write a story that you can shoot without overwhelming yourself. Yeah, I think like I had to ask myself this question 14 years ago when I was first diagnosed with my first condition. Is like I had to teach myself to slow down and to say no. Learning how to say no is like so important no matter what industry you're in or no matter what world you live in. Is like learning how to turn down things that you maybe really want to do but you just don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the energy. It points to like my social life too, is like learning how to say no to invitations and learning how to prioritize your own rest. You know, like I don't have a very clear answer to this question. All I'm saying is like it's something my whole filmmaking practice revolves around this question of like how do you make movies without injuring yourself, without burning yourself out. And that also refers to like your crew. Like, how do you create storytelling where you're not exploiting and you're not over exhausting the people who are helping you tell your stories? It's like, yeah, it's like a big question that we should all be like asking ourselves at every single panel. But I care deeply about this. Yes.
Well, I respect the 8 hours. I didn't know that you had like less than 8 hours each day. That's fantastic. And it starts from the top down, right? It starts from leadership. Like, you know, if you're going in with that mindset and you're teaching your creatives, like, this is the standard. Our standard is less than 8 hours. Everyone's going to adopt that going forward. It's great. Ian?
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this because it's such an important question in our industry, as I think, you know, we all know. I haven't figured it out yet. You know, it's like a big work-life balance is like, it's a real thing that I haven't been able to master just as yet, because yeah, I am able to say no to things now, but I'm also at a different part of my career. Like, when you're younger, you can't say no to things. Like, it's pretty much impossible to say no to opportunities because you're just trying to make a living or you're just trying to get work. And you know, I don't know. I didn't say no to a lot of things, and it led to burnout. And that's a problem. I don't. It's such a difficult thing, especially, you know, we're talking about features, but shooting a feature requires such a mental discipline that I didn't really appreciate until actually doing it. And it's like like when you're on day like 14 or 16 of 25 days or something, it's really hard to keep your energy up and to keep your focus. Like, I see it in the film now where I can see where I lose focus. Like, there's a scene in particular, which I don't want to talk about, but like, I know I could have done a better job on it, but I was just losing focus. Like, we shot during COVID, and that itself was like a huge, you know, pressure on your mind, because we had like this, there was like a big crowd scene, or even scenes with crowds, and everyone was unmasked in this one space. And I was like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to get COVID. I'm going to get COVID. We're going to have to shut down. And it was just like a huge mental stress and just trying to stay focused on the task in front of you. And that's something like I really underestimated, I think, in terms of what it was going to take. You know, obviously the physicalness of just trying to stay healthy for a long period of time, but just trying to stay like mentally there every single day, every single moment, where everyone's asking you questions all the time. And then there's like actors that are giving you, you know, their hearts and souls in front of a camera. And then how do you stay focused and trying to give them a direction and give them feedback, and then talk to your cinematographer, talk to your sound team, talk to your, you know, your art people. Like, everyone's there for you. And there's definitely like a mental fatigue that just is just constantly there all the time.
I just wanted to say one tool that I think I forgot before is that, like, for example, with Love in a Major Organ, the characters, the story have been in my life for over a decade. And I'm still excited to talk about it because it's all centered around a question that I can't answer, and something that's infinitely interesting to me, which is how to be someone who feels in the world. Is it easier to detach? Ideally, we're invested. It's like the question of, what do I do with my heart? And that is, I'll never answer that question. And so having that at the core, something that you always want to talk about with other people, is helpful in avoiding becoming burnt out and talking about your work, because you're always going to learn something new and something that's important to you.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Sorry, I didn't actually answer the question of like, how do you do it? So I'll just give one quick thing about what I try to do. And that is just to have spend a lot of time with friends and family that are not in the industry in any way. Yeah. Because we are in like a really stressful industry that really only we understand what that is. And so like, I try to ride the subway and just see people going about their daily lives. Like, that's really important to me, is to sort of stay grounded in reality.
I met someone recently who didn't know what Oppenheimer was, and I was like, that's fantastic. That's amazing. I don't know anybody that doesn't know what Oppenheimer is. That's incredible. Exactly. No, it's great. So we're going to open up to questions from the audience. So the question is, when you're making your short, do you have a feature that you're in mind, that you're developing? And if so, can you speak to that from, I guess, a financing perspective?
So my feature, Fortescue, was based off of two of my previous shorts, Eve Parade and Parlor Palm. But when I was making Parlor Palm and Eve Parade, I wasn't thinking like this is going to turn into a feature. It was only sort of like after I finished these stories where I was like, oh, these are the themes I'm exploring. I want to make a feature based on what I touched on in my shorts. All of my financing for my films comes from the arts councils, the Ontario Arts Council and the Canada Council. And in your applications, you can talk about how you were developing themes in your shorts and now you want to push for a feature. They're really into that. So that's how I financed. I financed my film through the Canada Council and through private financing, like fundraising, Indiegogo, that kind of stuff. But that was my process. So I didn't go into my shorts being like, but when you're like, in my mind, like whenever you're making any kind of short, you're dealing with a thesis you find interesting, you're dealing with themes you find interesting, and you can logically guess that down the line you may be interested in visiting some of these same themes in a bigger piece. So yeah.
That's interesting thematically. That makes sense to me, because I was going to say the shorts that I've made are shorts in themselves. They shouldn't be features. I screened a short here in 2019 called Spooning, and the premise is that it's a woman who's been playing a spoon in Beauty and the Beast for 21 years and what that does to a person. And that's 7 minutes long. Like, that's the length of that joke / thing that you're trying to find out about aging and whatever. But
I'd love to see that in a feature. Like, I'd love to see that expanded.
Well, and Rebecca Applebaum, who directed here, we were asked, is this for a feature? And we were both like, no. I mean, you could do something like Waiting for Guffman-esque, I guess. But the purpose of making that short was because there was a piece that we thought would be funny as a short, and something we thought we could access in 7 minutes that didn't really need a whole feature. I'm a big believer in shorts being a full story in themselves. I think you can still do that in preparation for a feature, whether that's thematically or taking a story from within the bigger story of your feature. In terms of financing, we went through Telefilm for a lot of our financing. We had to apply twice, so it took a little while. And I think one of the smartest things our producer, Madeline Davis, did was the first year we applied for Talent to Watch, which is not a lot of money, but it's money to make an indie feature, and we got close, we didn't get it. And then the second time, Madeline said, I don't think we can make this film for that money, so let's apply for regional, and that was the one that we got. So I would also say apply for your ideal, as opposed to making something smaller, maybe because you feel like you should, or because you feel like that's what people want, which is something I do sometimes. So I'll apply it to myself too.
That's a great note.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there are some ideas that just work as shorts and just aren't going to work as a feature. For me, I'm just interested in telling a story. What's the medium for it? Is it a short or is it a feature? With this particular film, again, like I mentioned earlier, it was like a 50-page script, which is not useless. But when I made the short film that the feature is adapted upon, it was kind of the ideal situation that happened with that film. The short was really successful out in the world. Like, we made it for $15,000. It wasn't a lot of money, mostly like private money and Kickstarter. And then, like the film went out, played tons of festivals, won awards, was licensed like for TV, like, several countries around the world. Still only made like $1,000 off of it or something like that. There's still no money for shorts. But what was cool was that it proved that there was an audience for like this really specific cultural story that I was telling. And if you'd go to screenings or you'd get feedback from people, they always wanted more. They had questions. They had more questions about it. And so that led to me and my producers being like, okay, let's actually go back to that original 50-page script and let's really go out and expand upon it. I was kind of naive in that I was trying to make the film about the Caribbean community and with the Caribbean community involved, and we were trying to raise the money privately, which went nowhere. That was kind of a mess and was like years of the project kind of set back because of that. And then we're like, you know what, who actually will support our film? Who really wants to see this? And we were able to go to Telefilm and to go to the Canada Council and the Ontario Arts Councils and make a case for this film to exist. And we're really fortunate that we were able to get that support from so many people in the industry to see a film that is at times really critical of Canada, but it still is a really Canadian film too.
We have time for one more question. This question more so relating to like a festival strategy, like when you finish the film now, you're looking to premiere it. How are you sort of building your strategies?
I think it's great to get to know festivals and what they're looking for, because it usually costs money to apply and it takes time. And I think you want to be judicious with the things that you choose and also ambitious at the same time. I think like going to events like this, coming to festivals that are local to you and meeting people that way. I usually, like the way that I started, even just in theater in Toronto, was I would go see things, and if I liked them, I would look up who made them and I would email them, because everyone is so accessible. And often we'd have a coffee and they'd say, oh, you should meet this person. And it would kind of go from there. That's really where I started. There's also, if you're a writer as well, I have a writers group that's been so useful to me too. And I think you want to really try to find a good producer who's passionate about your project. I feel like that's really key. Yeah. That's it.
So in my mind, filmmakers have to be socialites. You have to adopt like an outward mentality where you're constantly putting yourself out there. You have to invite, previously I was like, learn to say no. But also if you're just starting, you have to go out. You have to leave your house. Like painters can be hermits in the woods. Novelists can be hermits in the woods. Filmmakers, you cannot be a hermit. You cannot like live in your apartment. You have to go out to parties, go out to coffee shops, go out to film festivals, go out. Like the way I think about it is like, if you're interested in pursuing a career in filmmaking, you should be learning to talk to every person in your community about your filmmaking practice. Like, don't be afraid of being obnoxious. Like, I talk to my doctors about my films, and like before we start our appointments, like they will ask to watch clips of my films because they're like so on board, and they follow the trajectory. So it's like it's like be extreme. Don't be afraid of being obnoxious. Like, add a bunch of people on Instagram every single day. Follow what's going on. You have to just like be very extroverted. I mean, maybe there are a few filmmakers out there who can be their like quiet little hermit person who doesn't really engage with the world and doesn't really go out that much. But those are more the exception than the norm.
Well, it's interesting because like Ian just mentioned earlier, like, getting to know your communities outside of filmmakers as well.
Yes.
Sometimes that's even easier too, right?
Yes.
Like I mentioned earlier, my friend didn't know what Oppenheimer was, but like showing her like, let's say, works and stuff like that. And actually like you find yourself almost in this mode of like sort of teaching about the practice too, which is interesting.
And inviting them into your world.
Yeah.
Like the people who
exactly.
don't know anything about film, invite them to your screenings because a lot of them will be interested. A lot of them want things to take part in, it's like, but it's just a mindset of like, you can't be shy. Like you have to be, anyways, I'm a little obnoxious about this. I'm very like extroverted and like just putting myself out there all the time, but like, I think it served me well. So
it's fantastic. And last note.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think it's really a matter of talking. It's really uncomfortable to talk about yourself, but that's something you've got to be good. You've got to be comfortable with talking about yourself and asking people for money just completely shamelessly. Like I've become really good at it because that's the only way you're gonna have to be able to. Like, of course, you need passionate producers and stuff like that can help you out. But honestly, no one's gonna care more about your movie than you will. Like you are your biggest advocate when you're getting things done. You have to know people. You have to know programmers. Do your research. Like every festival lists who their programmers are. You need to talk to these people. Like with my previous shorts, I got to meet a lot of programmers through that, and lo and behold, they're still programming my work. Actually, at this festival, Laura Good. I'm not sure like the background in terms of how my film gets programmed here for opening night, but Laura Good's a programmer, and she's programmed all of my shorts in other places, right? So these programmers really become like your advocate as well for your work and your career, and it's a really crucial part of of the film festival game, but also just getting people to see your work. And not like every festival is for your movie as well. Like you have to know what your film is, and who the audience in fact is that will actually come out to see it. And like you have to just know the industry. Like you've got to read Playback, you've got to read Variety. Like you have to know just names of who these people are that are actually making decisions in production, and then can because you never know who you're going to meet somebody just down the line, or even like in a setting like this, who you can have a conversation with, and they're like, oh, actually I know about your film, or oh, you just are working on this other project or whatever. So you also just have to do a lot of homework as well.
That's great. Thank you. When I was in first year university, I would add programmers on Facebook. It was hilarious. And I was like, I'm a big fan of you. Can we talk? But then I just started going in person. It was great. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ian, Julia, Rebecca, and Eric. Your tales and tips are not short on invaluable information for us to digest today. This chat was produced by Jen Pogue, Ashley Rains, and Bern Euler for the Canadian Film Fest. Music by Brett Higgins. The Cheers and Chats podcast is co-produced, edited, and sound mixed by Ryan Gordon. For more info on the fun happening now at CFF, find us at CanadianFilmFest.ca.